Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to wait a few more minutes to give people a chance to get signed on, and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I'll just say it again for those who recently joined. We're going to just wait another couple minutes for anyone else to join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Good morning and welcome to the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safeties, which we refer to as Energy Safeties, public meeting to consider adoption of energy safeties compliance guidelines. My name is Susie Rose, and I'm the program manager of the Compliance Assurance Division at Energy Safety. Joining me here today is Gary Candelas, an environmental scientist, also from the Compliance Assurance Division. I'd like to take a moment to review the agenda for today's public meeting. So our agenda today is the introduction, which we're doing right now, a safety message. We'll have an opportunity for public comment. Then we'll go through an overview of the compliance guidelines. We'll discuss a few changes that we made to the draft compliance guidelines in response to public comment. And then we'll move into the adoption phase of the meeting with some closing remarks. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Gary for the introduction and safety message.
Good morning. Welcome to Energy Safety's adoption meeting for the compliance guidelines. A brief safety message. Please be aware of your surroundings and know your evacuation routes. We are now come to public comments. If you wish to comment, press the raise hand button on Zoom. Participants will be unmuted in order of hand raised. If you are dialing in, participants need to press #2 to raise your hand. We will now give a few minutes to see if we have any raised hands.
Okay, it does not look like we have any raised hands, and we don't have very many attendees. So I think we are safe to move on to the next slide. If anyone was trying to raise your hand and wasn't able, feel free to raise your hand later in the presentation and we'll try to get to you.
All right, moving on. We will discuss an overview of the compliance guidelines. Pursuant to Section 8386.3C, Energy Safety is charged with overseeing the Electrical Corporation's compliance with approved wildfire mitigation plans. Energy Safety's compliance guidelines set forth substantive and procedural requirements for electrical corporations both during and after the annual compliance period. Written public comments and changes from draft to proposed final compliance guidelines. Draft compliance guidelines were published on June 20th, 2023. Comments on draft compliance guidelines were received from San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and Pacific Gas and Electric on July 10th, 2023. Draft compliance guidelines version 2 were published on August 10th, 2023, with comments on compliance guidelines version 2 were received from SCE on August 21st, 2023. So today we will review the changes made from the first draft compliance guidelines to the proposed final version of the compliance guidelines before us for the adoption today.
Thanks, Gary. The following changes were made to 4 specifically defined terms in the compliance guidelines. We amended the definitions of the terms target, initiative, and goals to make the definitions consistent with the WMP technical guidelines. That's the Wildfire Mitigation Plan technical guidelines. And then we also amended the definition of the term commitment to clarify that it expressly includes targets. Next slide. Other changes to the draft compliance guidelines, we amended a section 5, subsection F, to allow electrical corporations to review independent evaluator annual reports on compliance before publication to ensure that confidential information is appropriately redacted. We also amended section 5.1 to require each electrical corporation to disclose conflict of interest information only for the independent evaluator for whom the electrical corporation contracts with, instead of all the independent evaluators. We amended the SVM audit evaluation criteria in section 6.1. And then lastly, we amended the evaluation criteria 2, 3, and 5 in section 7.1. And SVM is the substantial vegetation management audit. And just one note, we actually made all of those changes between from the first draft to the version 2 of the draft. So there are not any additional changes that happened between version 2 of the draft compliance guidelines and the proposed final that we are discussing adopting today. Next slide. So we now are moving to the portion of the public meeting where we will consider adoption of the compliance guidelines. Energy Safety issued the original notice of this public meeting on July 20th, 2023. On July 28th, 2023, we issued a postponement notice for the meeting so that we could issue the version 2 of the guidelines. And then on August 10th, 2023, we reissued the notice for today's public meeting. Energy Safety released its draft compliance guidelines, as Gary discussed previously, on June 10th, 2023 for a 30-day public comment period. After considering the comments provided, Energy Safety released version 2 on August 10th, 2023 for an additional comment period. All of these documents discussed were distributed on the compliance guidelines docket through Energy Safety's e-filing system with service to the associated service lists. Energy Safety also published the draft guidelines on its website. Energy Safety received comments on version 2 through August 21st, 2023, and evaluated those comments to develop the proposed final compliance guidelines here before us today. The proposed final compliance guidelines include changes from the draft guidelines as we just discussed earlier in this meeting. Energy Safety has considered written comments in developing the compliance guidelines. There were no verbal comments today at the adoption meeting. Therefore, the final compliance guidelines are hereby adopted. A clean version of the final guidelines will be published on Energy Safety's website and released on the compliance guidelines docket through our e-filing system with service to the associated service list by September 8th, 2023. That's tomorrow. Thank you very much for your participation in today's public meeting, and the meeting is now adjourned.